You are about to learn one of the most fantastic recipes. This is something that has literally changed my life. I consume this on the daily. Well, not quite daily, but weekly for sure. Anytime I have a special guest, I have fed this to Sandor Katz of Wild Fermentation, Yarrow Willard from Harmonic Arts. Anyone who comes and stays at my house, this is what I serve. I serve it to my daughter and her friends. They absolutely love it. It will help you get away from bread, remove or reduce the amount of gluten you have in your life. You're gonna get into fermentation. It is fantastic all around. Are you ready? Are you excited? Here we go. All right, this is a variation on injera. Injera is a flatbread. It's a sourdough, gluten-free bread. Well, sometimes traditionally it's got barley mixed in, but the way I'm doing it, the way I'm going to share with you, is absolutely gluten-free. This is something that you can whip up anytime. If you've got a little batch sourdough starter culture, I'll show you exactly how to make that easily and simply. You can have it on your counter, and anytime you can whip up these flatbreads in less than 2 minutes and turn that into a meal, turn it into a snack for yourself, for your family, whatever it is really that fantastic. We're gonna have lots of fun with this. So the base is Teff. And I'm going to show you a few other variations that you can use. It doesn't have to be Teff. Teff is a grain. It's inherently gluten-free. It originates from Ethiopia and that area and has been traditionally used as a staple by that culture. And it's beginning to get more well-known. In fact, where we source our Teff is actually grown in the United States organically. So super awesome to have access that way. We bring it up, and I love working with the Teff, but you can also use and integrate different types of grains. Whatever you're into, whatever you have access, it all work, and it's all fantastic. Now, injera, where this original inspiration came from, you ever been to an Ethiopian restaurant? Who's been to one? And you get that nice big flat spongy bread. It's massive, right? And they serve the curries on it, and you pick up this spongy bread and you dip it into your curry and you eat it with your hands. That's traditionally where this type of flatbread comes from, but the method that you're going to learn, you can create it like that. You can also think of it more like a chapati, right? Or a naan, or just a regular old wrap, a crepe. I'll show you a variation that you can turn this into a pancake. So going to give you lots of flexibility, lots of freedom to be able to play with this recipe. And one of the best things, apart from it being gluten-free, apart from it maybe helping you reduce the amount of bread that's in your life, is that it is fermented. So this is a sourdough. It's pre-digested. So not only it's not a grain in the sense of being gluten containing, but it's fermented. So it's going to help your digestion. It's very easy to digest. And it just hits the spot. Like for me, I was born and raised family, we love bread. Like sandwiches was kind of the classic food, especially for lunches, especially on outings, that kind of picnic meal, even addition to meals, bread and soup. I mean, it's so pervasive and it's so classic, and yet so many of us are finding issues with bread, and we're looking for those alternatives. And they're out there and they're okay, but I have to tell you, this here has been an absolute game changer for me, and I know a number of many other people that have gotten into making this recipe and are absolutely loving it. Let's start. Now, like I mentioned, Teff is kind of the feature grain here. It is the smallest grain in the world. It is said that you can take a pound of Teff, plant it out. There's so many seeds, so many little grains in there that you could plant a pound and you will get 1 ton of grain in return when you come to harvest it. That's pretty incredible. It's packed in protein, B vitamins, this thing called resistant starches. So it's like good fiber. Resistant starch is similar to soluble fiber in that your body doesn't break it down. It actually helps feed your probiotics. So it's a prebiotic. We keep hearing all these buzzwords about probiotics, prebiotics. Teff is a prebiotic. So not only are we going to ferment it, these friendly bacteria, they're going to break down, pre-digest this grain, this teff, and we're going to be feeding our own internal cultures with this food. So yes, we need good Probiotics, they are essential to our digestive health, our immune health, mental, emotional health, but also we need the prebiotics. There's no point in, taking probiotic capsules or eating sauerkraut and trying to, get those good bacteria in if you aren't providing a good environment for them to live and to thrive, right? My friend Yarrow Willard and his dad Terry, they always joke around about it's like throwing yuppies into the ghetto, right? It's like they're not going to last long. So you need to create that environment for them to grow and to thrive and want to be and stay, to have that healthy population. That key part of that is the prebiotics, food that nourishes them. Teff and other grains provide that. Here we are, we got our Teff. There are a couple different varieties and versions of it. At the Light Cellar, we sell what's called brown Teff as well as ivory Teff. Now this is similar to maybe differences that you might have seen in flaxseed. There's brown flax, there's gold flax. There can be certain variations. Essentially, the color, there's a difference there. Slight difference in terms of texture and taste, but for all intents and purposes, they really are the same. So if you have the brown Teff, ivory Teff, both will work in this instance. You can buy the flour pre-ground. I like to just get the grain, and I'll have a coffee grinder or a magic bullet, Vitamix, any of that kind of thing that will help grind the grains into a flour. That way it's fresh immediately for you, but absolutely you can also buy the grains pre-ground into a flour. I like to grind them up myself. I'll just show you how I do that. So I just take my bag and I'll throw in a couple of cups. That might be about 2 cups there of the Teff into a grinder, a mixer. So here we are, this is just a little magic bullet. It's got that flour grinding grain on there. So I put the lid on, bring it over to the machine here, and we're just gonna quickly grind that into a flour, nice and fresh. All right, okay, we got that nicely ground, fine and smooth. Now, this is almost like a pre-step here in order to create the fermentation. You can do it unfermented. I'll show you how to do that, but I'm going to suggest and encourage you that you do this step of fermentation. So, in goes the flour into a ceramic or glass bowl. Metal is less ideal. We want ceramic or glass, just into there. And you can do as much as you want, right? So if I know, like if I'm gonna do a class or I'm doing an event where I'm serving a lot of these, I'll do a lot of the flour, big volume. But if it's just something that I know I'm gonna be, hey, let's make some Teff wraps this week, I wanna have it on hand, what I'll do is I'll typically do this on the weekend, and then I know I'm covered for the week, right? Okay, quick snack as the child gets home from after school. Maybe they got friends over. Maybe you need it for your lunches. You can plan that in and have enough batter ready to go for the week. All right, so it's pre-ground. There's our flour in there. Now we're gonna add liquid. We want to do about equal part, and along with that liquid we're going to add in a starter culture. So you can do 100% of your liquid volume as a starter culture if you want. And by starter culture, what I mean is something that has living bacteria already in it. Now for instance, that could be whey from cheese or from yogurt, like separating out that whey, that liquid that sometimes forms on top. It could be kefir, either dairy kefir or water kefir. I often use pickle juice, right? So here I've got some pickled peppers that Peter Piper pickled. No, I didn't. That was a Denis Manser. Pickled up some peppers back in the fall. And as you're working through those peppers, the pickles, be whatever kind they are, you've got all this wonderful brine. Now it has to be what we call lacto-fermented pickles. In a future video, in another series, we're gonna go through that. I teach that in my fermentation course, is how to make lacto-fermented pickles. This is not your vinegar pickles. This is with salt, good bacteria, so there's living culture. That's what's going to culture this, make it come to life, and activate that sourdough culture. Now, depending if you're going to use, let's say, dill pickles and add that in, some of that flavor is going to come through. So think about, are these going to be savory? Are these going to be sweet? And then how much you're going to use. So at the very least, you can add equal parts water, just water, and a little bit of salt. And you can even let your starter, meaning the bacteria that are actually going to ferment this, come from the air, right? A wild ferment, like as maybe a typical sourdough bread might be done. You don't always have to add a starter. You can have just had liquid and let the wild bacteria and yeast from the air, from your environment, come into that mixture, and absolutely it will ferment it. I usually do like to add a starter, so again, might be a little bit of pickle juice, might be a little bit of whey left over, a little bit of juice from a sauerkraut, a little bit from your kefir, whatever it is. Hey, you could even use probiotic capsules that you can open up if you have some bacteria that you want to cultivate, get them into the mix, go for that. That is one option. I'm just going to use a little bit of the pickle juice here. I've been talking about that. I have a nice kind of sweet sour flavor from the pickles, a little bit of a savory taste, and minimum about a tablespoon for that. But again, it can be all the liquid, a couple tablespoons, even up to half cup. That is the starter. Now we know we've got good bacteria in there. They're going to start to go to work as soon as they kind of make their home in this new liquid, this new mixture. We let that sit out at room temperature, a nice warm spot, and what you'll notice after 24 hours, 36 hours, 48 hours, depending on temperature, depending if you added a culture ahead of time, is that will now come to life. Well, how do you know it's going to come to life? Well, you're going to see activity, notably bubbles, notably kind of as a result of those bubbles, a rising of that mixture, right? So these bacteria, these yeast, they're beginning to digest and break down those starches, those sugars, and one of the things they release as a byproduct, in addition to certain acids that are super beneficial, is carbon dioxide. So this one here, you'll be able to see right on top, you can see those bubbles, right? These two look very different. So that I've just prepped. That has not started, is not active, yet the one on the left here, or on your screen might be the right, that is an active culture. I can look, I can see the bubbles, I can see there's even just kind of like a visual change even beyond the bubbles. I can also have a smell of it too. You'll notice a little hint of sourness, right, as that begins to ferment, as that culture gets active. Now you've got this sourdough culture. It's ready to go. You can turn this into your gluten-free wraps right away. If you're not ready, once it's active, once it's bubbled, then you would maybe feed it. Again, you can keep it going. So add a little bit more of the ground flour, add that in, a little extra water, stir it up. Okay, now one really key step here is during the fermentation period. As you get it started, and for as long as you have this culture, you must make sure that you stir it every day. Even better, twice a day. Now this is the difference between a good ferment, what I call a friendly ferment of good probiotics, good bacteria, and maybe something that's going to go a little funky, right? So it's stirring it every day. If we just let that sit, what'll happen is, sure, some good fermentation will be happening underneath, but we're going to get some maybe not so good or desirable bacteria sitting on the top. You might get like a white film of some what's called cam yeast. That could then turn into a mold. And oftentimes as well, you can get like a black liquid, some oxidation that's happening on top. That we don't want. Super easy to get rid of is simply stirring it. So you get up in the morning, you give it a stir. You come home from work, you give it a stir. That's all you need to do, is just keep stirring that in, mixing it up, and you are going to be good to go. One last quick ingredient, which I often add to this recipe here, is just a pinch of salt. Definitely not necessary, but I think it's a good idea, and I'll typically add it in. Salt, in a lot of cases of fermentation, creates a more favorable environment for the good bacteria, and then of course flavor just helps bring up that flavor. All right. So everyone with me here, we're doing good. So we've got, this is our brand new starter. I'm going to leave that on the counter. I'm going to stir it once or twice a day and let that ferment, let it come to activity. And I'll know that from the bubbles, from the smell, from the look, everything. And for our purposes, just to take this one step further, actually how to make the flatbreads is I've got this ready to go here. So this is active, this is ready. We want to make sure we got a nice thin consistency. Think of like pancake batter, right? Something you can pour into a skillet. I've turned my pan on, so I've got the stove on here. I'm using a pan this is a cast iron. Works really well. It's doesn't have anything stick to it. So any kind of pan that you have that is non-stick, you can, if you want, just lightly brush it, lightly oil it. just ahead of time if you want to make sure that it won't stick to the pan. Key thing is, we want to wait for that to get warm, wait for it to get hot, and then we'll pour our batter in. Now depending, and you probably saw me, I'm not that exact when it comes to ratios, but if initially when you're adding your dried flour and your liquid, it's about equal parts, right? Now, right now it looks a little bit watery, but as the water or the liquid begins to kind of absorb, penetrate into the grain, the grain absorbs the liquid, that will balance out and it won't be so watery. If you get to this stage and it's fermented and it's maybe looking a little thick, right? You do want a nice like thin batter. You can always add a little bit of extra liquid to thin that out. You don't want it too thick. You also don't want it too thin either. So if it was too thin, you can add a little bit of extra grain to it to get it that nice consistency. As with anything, it's just about doing it. It's playing, it's experimenting. Then you'll get that clarity, you'll get that confidence when you start working with it. But it's so easy, right? So first, 1 to 2 days on the counter, you're stirring it, you got it active, now you're ready here. Okay, so we've got our pan just about hot. It's getting there. And I'm essentially just gonna pour it into the pan, let one side cook at a time, and we'll flip it over and we're gonna have an awesome, amazing wrap. So I turn the stove on to about medium heat. You don't want it too high, you don't want it too low. And again, you want that warm enough that when you pour it in, you're gonna hear, well, there we go. You're gonna hear a little bit of noise. All right, so you pour that in and we're gonna swirl it around. Let it spread out, a nice thin consistency. And we're now just gonna let that cook. And as this cooks, we'll get the camera back in here in a moment and you'll be able to see how around the edges and underneath is cooked. It'll be ready to flip. That'll be our indication and we can turn it. You can also put a lid on and then you begin to hear, right? You put the lid on. One of the indications that you know that one side is done is you'll begin to hear a little like drips of steam. So there's that condensation from being covered and the steam starts to kind of drop down, hitting the warm pan. You'll hear those little like hits of steam. That's another indication that, oh, okay, you can lift that off and then turn it over. But you'll see that this very quickly is starting to cook around the edges, then through into the center. Now for this one here, I've just done it plain, right? So I've added no other flavors and you can absolutely do that. Or if you want, at this stage, I wouldn't do it for your entire batch unless you want, but typically, let's say if I had this entire jar full and I wanted to, I know I was going to cook, half the amount of Teff wraps, but maybe I want them with a little curry flavor, right? Depending on what I'm going to do, I might want to pre-flavor that wrap. So you can pour off half your batter that you're going to cook, stir in some other flavors. You can even stir in things like nicely finely chopped green onions, right? You can add that in, or let's say if I'm going to do it sweet, I could add in a little bit of cinnamon, a little bit of ginger, other flavors you can add in. You can add in different superfood powders like maca or mesquite or pine pollen. This is such a great recipe that you can easily, simply add into your life that, no word of lie, I don't know how many people, more than both my hands, I know personally, who have integrated this into their day-to-day and are just loving it. And that's why I wanted to share this, because it's such a game changer. All right, so let's bring the camera back over and you'll see very quickly how long I've been rambling for. 1 minute, 2 minutes since I put that into the pan. And you'll see the top is looking dry. The sides are kind of beginning to lift up a little bit. One thing you do want to look for is maybe it's that center part that's going to be the last to really get cooked. So I want to make sure that looks the same as the outside. It's not too wet. That there's a bit of dryness. You can see it starting to kind of crack, and then the edge is lifting up. Next test, kind of broke a bit of the side there, is make sure that you can get underneath it without scraping. So there you go, just a quick flip, and now I've got one side done, and now I'm going to cook the other side. Now, if you're making more like a tortilla or a wrap, that type of style, at this stage, this is the perfect time to put a little cheese on there, right? Maybe it's your vegan cheese, your cashew cheese. Maybe it's a dairy cheese like a mozzarella or a cheddar, something like that. You can put that on, sliced or grated, spread, and now that as the one side is cooking, finishing off, you're getting your cheese melted, and then over here you've got your tomatoes, you got your lettuce, you got all your other condiments and seasoning that you might want want to stack up to do a wonderful fresh vegetable wrap. You know, sauerkraut, fermented hot sauce, those are some of the favorite things that I like to put on there. And that, to me, that's just like one of the best, like quick and easy savory meals. So fantastic. So have sprouts, have microgreens, have some sauerkraut, have some hot sauce, tomatoes, peppers, pickles, I mean, you name it, right? You can really build it up. And if you don't want cheese, other alternatives, my daughter, her absolute favorite way to have a savory wrap is with tahini and miso. So you get your tahini and your miso. So once your wrap is done, you pick that up, you spread on your tahini and your miso, and then you put on all those same toppings, right? Your tomatoes, your pickles, your sprouts, your microgreens, and that's a fantastic way to do it. Other ways I've done it by adding cheese is cheese and chocolate. I know that sounds a little weird, but just wait till you try it, right? So in my fermentation class, I teach what we call a farmer's cheese, like a blanc fromage. It's just a quick, simple, easy ferment, and I'll put that on, then I'll put chocolate, and the chocolate begins to melt, and then I'll drizzle honey on it, and that is absolutely fantastic. So this is kind of more in the, you know, the sweeter crepe realm. My daughter, one of her favorite ways for a sweet crepe in this sense is we'll do the chocolate. So instead of melting cheese on it, now we put little bits of chocolate. And this is very often her breakfast, by the way. Chocolate for breakfast is we'll do chocolate melted, and then we'll do a little bit of nut butter. That could be tahini, almond butter, sunflower butter, whatever you got, hazelnut butter, and then add chopped up banana, roll that up, and it makes a perfect snack, perfect little wrap. All right, so as you're getting these Teff wraps coming off the grill, so you can now see both sides are well cooked, and it's still got that flexibility to it, right? So if I were to let that go and cook longer all the way through, and it is cooked through, it's not gooey, it's not messy, it's pick upable, but it's also pliable. If you want to get this nice and crispy where you can like cut it almost like a pita chip, in that sense, is you would just keep putting it on the grill, you know, flip it another time or two, and then you can cook it almost to a crisp where it's like a pita chip, and you can be dipping and doing that kind of a thing. But in the case of a wrap, we very often want something that we can wrap, we can mold, we can fold, and do it that way too. So I'll put that one aside, and I can go ahead and I could be making these all day, right? There we go. Now you can hear that. All right, pouring in the batter. And we spread it all around, nice and even in the pan. Not too thin, not too thick. You know, if it's too thin, it's just gonna break when you try and pick it up and do a wrap. If it's too thick, it's gonna take a while to cook through. And, you know, a thick wrap, maybe not the best, but here's another thing. If you make it a little bit thicker, I mean, basically I've got a gluten-free like pizza shell right there, right? So you could make it a little bit thicker and almost use it like a pizza shell. So you put your tomato sauce on there, you put your olives, you put your, you know, whatever kind of toppings that you're into. And again, I'd cook it maybe just a little bit longer, not quite as crispy as a pita chip, but a little bit more. And that's another way to go. So what we're noticing now, put in my second batch, we've got a nice hot skillet, so it's happening even quicker. I just poured this in maybe about 30 seconds ago, and boom, turning it over. Second one has that nice light browned side to it, indicating it was ready to flip. Turned it, second one is ready to go. So, you know, family of 4, family of 5, you can be banging these out no problem, right? Get your kids, get your husband, whoever, kind of, you know, doing the station of putting on the sweet or the savory ingredients. You're making the next one, and away you go. So these are really fun. These are really fantastic. Do we have any questions? Anybody got any questions? Just pop them down into the comments. What happens if you don't have Teff? Well, hey, we've got it at the Light Cellar. It's a fantastic grain. But here's the thing, you can use any type of grain. I mean, the same principle is, you know, sourdough, wheat, spelt, this kind of thing. But I know a lot of us are looking for alternatives, trying to move away from the gluten-containing grains into more like kind of the pseudo grains, maybe not even quite a grain. So you can do this with buckwheat. You can do this with amaranth. You can do this with millet. Those all work, and oftentimes what I'll do is I'll do a mix. I mean, I just kind of have this love for the teff. I don't know what it is about it. I love the flavor, I love the texture, I love there's obviously something about the nutrition that my body likes. So oftentimes I'll still have teff as the base, and then I might do amaranth. I might do the buckwheat in addition to it, and that can be 50-50, 70-30, 60-40, or even 100. You know, pick one or do a combination, do a blend. In fact, I'm sure it's probably because of my Scottish roots. I love oats, right? I can't say I love oatmeal. Personally, I find it just like kind of too heavy. It's kind of like a rock in my stomach. But I love oats. I love it for crumble. I love it in cookies. And it works fantastically in this way as well. So again, some of those friends that have been, you know, latching onto this method, integrating it in a part of their everyday. I know Denis Manzer, many of you guys know him from the Light Cellar. He does 100% oat, right? So sometimes we'll do that mix, oat and teff. Other times it can be all oat. Just find that right one that works for you. Now, oats are inherently gluten-free. There is actually no gluten contained in oats. What happens is that it's often a cross-contamination. So oats grown in the same field that are on a crop rotation of, say, wheat or rye, you can't be guaranteed that all the wheat was cleared out of that field, right? So if someone's really sensitive and they're doing that crop rotation, or they're using the same equipment, they harvest wheat and then they go harvest oats, or then they go harvest rye, or the storage of it. That is where a lot of that contamination comes from. We know there's that sensitivity and that preference, so we source oat from a specific source that certifies them gluten-free because they are inherently that way. Oats tend to be a little bit less expensive than your teff. You know, maybe where your oats might, you know, depending on where you're getting them, they can run anywhere, you know, a couple of dollars per pound, $5 per pound. Teff is just maybe $2 or $3 more, a little bit more expensive. So a nice way to kind of mix it up and balance it out that way. But really, ultimately, what do you have on hand? What do you like the flavor of? You can do that. And I've got one more quick little idea variation version for you. That is, you can turn this into a pancake, right? So it's a savory wrap. It can be a sweet crepe, but this same batter that's been fermented, that's gluten-free, you can actually turn it into pancakes. How would you do that? Well, what we typically do is we take that fermented batter, we'll add a little bit of baking soda, a little bit of eggs, you know, that same process that you're making your pancakes with, but now you're just using that as the base. So you've already got a little bit of your liquid and your dry mixed together, and you add in those key ingredients of eggs or egg replacement, you know, however you make your pancakes. A little bit of baking soda or powder, help give it that rise, that lift. Mix up your batter, pour it into your skillet, and hey, there you go. Now you got your gluten-free pancakes. Add in that buckwheat, that's always a good one. You can stir in fruit. So lots to go on here. Did we have any questions or anything coming up for you guys? Just let me know, type it in the comments below. And of course, if you're watching this post live, if you're not joining us live, you can still absolutely drop your comments in there, and we'll be on there following up and saying hey. But as much as we can, we're going to be doing this easy upgrades, this idea of just simple recipe ideas, simple concepts, nutritional hooks, little hacks, that you can add to your life in a really easy way, non-complicated. Let's make it simple. Let's make it as easy as possible for you. All right, thanks for tuning in. I've been having fun. Again, this is one of my favorite recipes. We've got over 30,000 views on YouTube from this video I did 2 years ago. I wanted to kind of update it, wanted to do it live, get you engaged, get any of your questions answered. This will be available on the post for you to share, right? How many people do you know that have gluten sensitivities? How many people you know that could use less bread in their life? You know, send them this video, send them this recipe. It is a total life changer. I know that sounds a little bit like hype, but I'm speaking from experience. I'm speaking from observing so many of my friends, other colleagues that have gotten into the way of the Teff wrap. And it's kind of fun too, because it's a little bit of a gateway. If you're not into fermentation yet, this is a way that you can kind of get into it. You see like, okay, wow, this is really easy. You know, I've taken this dry bulk food, initiated this process of fermentation, brought in these friendly ferments, these bacteria, transformed the food, you've added flavor, you've made it more digestible, and that's inspiring, that's empowering when you have one thing that you've taken and you've created successfully. Now, what other ferments do you want to get into? So keep staying tuned. We're going to have lots more of these videos coming out each week to empower you, give you all the easy upgrades that I've seen made a difference in my life, in families' life, in customers' lives, clients' lives. That's the whole point. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you again next week. And I'm going to enjoy these Teff wraps.